Hi everyone, it's me. Welcome to another video. We're starting to get into the end of the year. We're starting to wrap up the books that we read. So today we're actually going to be talking about the list of my most anticipated 2024 books that I made at the beginning of this year with an accompanying video. And we're going to see how I feel about that list now at the end of the year and now that I've actually read all of those books. We're gonna go through all the books on the list. We're gonna see if they actually lived up to my expectations. And yeah, that's what this video is. If you haven't watched that video from the beginning of the year yet, go watch that one. In that one, I will go through more of the synopsis of every book, the genre, what it's about, etc. And this video is more about my feelings after reading. And while I was looking back at that old list and reflecting on these books, jogging my memory on how I felt about them, I realized I feel like a lot of my critiques or reviews today about these books may sound a little more critical than I normally sound, but I think that's just a given because my hopes and expectations for these books were so high. So even if I did enjoy these books, I still, for some of them, did have, some nitpicky critiques just because these are some of my favorite authors. I expect just perfection from them at this point. So we're gonna get into it. Tea of the day today is Mother's Little Helper. This is actually my third tea of the day. First one, we are going to start off with a bang. House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas came out in January, so it was my first anticipated release of the year. Let's dive into it because I know this one had a lot of mixed reviews when it came out. There were a lot of controversial opinions. I'm gonna be 100% honest with you guys. I feel like literally at this point, anything that Sarah J. Maas writes in her universe, I will very highly likely enjoy reading it just because I'm spending time in these worlds that I have already grown to love and know. So even if, I don't know, one of her books falls short of expectations, I feel like I'm just gonna love it anyways because I love just existing in her worlds. I feel like this book received some harsh criticisms for three main reasons. The first reason, after the ending of Sky and Breath, I feel like everyone had just so many expectations of where they thought this book was going to go with the chaos that happened and everything that got introduced in the second book in the series. The theories were just wild. If you were on any form of social media, you would have seen these theories. There were so many and it was literally impossible for every single one of them to come to fruition. And so I feel like with so many theories running around the internet, people were bound to be disappointed because some of these theories were so deep, they were so well developed. Some of them started to feel more canon than fanon, and many of those theories did not come to be, and so I feel like that's a big reason why a lot of people were disappointed. Number two, I do agree that Flame and Shadow specifically was not as well packaged as a lot of other Sarah J. Maas books. It's definitely the most messy. It's definitely the most loosely structured, a little bit chaotic, and the story overall just didn't flow as well as her stories normally do. And the third reason I think many SJM fans are disappointed at this one is that I feel like a lot of her fans maybe just don't vibe with the urban fantasy genre. ACOTAR and Throne of Glass are more historical, more period, where her Crescent City series is literally, it takes place in a city. There's condos, there's TV, there's sports, people are texting, people are emailing, there's video chats. This is a very different vibe than her other two worlds, and I feel like because of that, a lot of people maybe just didn't get along with the technology. I think I felt that to some extent as well. I definitely prefer more I don't know, fantasies that don't resemble the real world. I definitely prefer that as well. So I think that's another reason why people just don't like Crescent City as much in general. I still had so much fun reading this book. I think my biggest criticism was that there were kind of 4 main timelines going on in this book, and 2 of those POV timelines were just, it was like every time you flipped to a chapter and read that person's name or those 2 characters' name, I would just be like, I don't want to read about these people. I want to read about the other person that I really, really love. But with 4 main storylines, if 2 of the POVs are not, you're not too interested in reading them, obviously that's going to impact your overall experience of the book. I also think this book did suffer a lot from sort of a second book or middle book syndrome. I feel like this book, it helped set up what is going to happen in the future of the Sarah J. Maas universe. And the funny thing is, after reading the end of this book, I was like, I'm so excited for what she is writing next. Because of that, because she used this book to set up so many different things, it just suffered a little bit of second book syndrome. Even with all that, even with all the criticism, I still thoroughly enjoyed this book. Was it it my favorite Sarah J Maas ever? No, but I still liked it. Next we have Bride by Hazelwood. I feel like I just shook the entire desk by doing that move. So I was very excited about this book because it's the first paranormal romance that Allie wrote. All of her other books, or I don't know if all of them at this point, but at the point when this book was announced, I feel like all of her other books were her STEM romances. I had only read The Love Hypothesis before reading Bride, and I just heard that the rest of her STEM romances were sort of the same thing in a different font, so I just didn't feel compelled, that's the word. I didn't feel compelled to read her other STEM romances, but then she announced Bride, which was very different, vampire werewolf romance, and that just called to my like old teenager Twilight bones. And I found this to be super fun. I think this met my expectations. I read this book as sort of a parody on the genre. I always say Hazelwood is the best at humor. She is just a funny gal. Some of her romance I don't really care for, but the main thing I read her books for is the comedy. Like, her jokes are immaculate. They're great. And I feel like this entire book was kind of a parody of a vampire werewolf romance. It was very self-aware. It knew what it was doing. Like, she knew that a vampire werewolf romance was stereotypical. It was chuggy. It was just funny. And so she inserted a lot of very self-aware vampire werewolf jokes in the book, and I really enjoyed that and thought it was really fun. I will say a lot of people expected this book to be a bit more of a romantasy, and it's definitely not a romantasy. It is fully a paranormal romance. The fantasy part of this book is not very strong. We basically just have a romantic story, a romance story set in a sort of paranormal world. And so if you're reading for world building, if you're reading for a big, great fantasy story, you're not gonna get that from this. It's a romance book. And so I feel like while maybe the climax of the plot turned into more of a fantasy story, that part was probably the weakest part of the book for me. There was some anatomy that I learned from this book that I did not need that knowledge ever. And so that brought my rating down a bit for this book, because I was like, I didn't need to know that. I didn't need to know the details about certain anatomy parts of a wolf. I didn't need it. So other than that, I thought this was a super fun read, met my expectations. The Prisoner's Throne. I am a little bit sad to say that this did not meet my expectations. So this is the second book of the Stolen Heir duology, which is a spin-off from the Cruel Prince trilogy. I found the Stolen Heir to be super, super fun. It was very much more of an adventure quest type of a book compared to the Cruel Prince, which was definitely more of a political fantasy. And I feel like Holly Black, I know there was a lot of criticism about The Stolen Heir because it was more quest-based versus political-based, and there was a lot of critique and people were saying it didn't feel like The Cruel Prince. And I feel like Holly Black took that to heart, and I don't think it was a good thing, because The Prisoner's Throne tried to be Cruel Prince. I feel like this tried to be more of a political fantasy. For me, it caused continuity issues between the first and the second book. They felt very, very different, and this didn't feel like part of the same duology as The Stolen Heir. So I kind of wish that this one stayed more adventure quest, to be honest, because I feel like if you are going to try and create something that is emulating the original, you're gonna have to make it really dang near perfect for it to live up, and I feel like this felt weaker compared to The Cruel Prince. If you're reading a political fantasy, it didn't hit the same. It just didn't hit the same. I thought it was okay, but I don't know, I was expecting more from this one, to be honest. The next book I actually got an e-arc for, so I don't have the physical copy, but I screamed when I got the e-arc for this because it was on my anticipated books of the year list, and the fact that I got to read it early was really exciting. But that book is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez, and let me say, this was the first book of my anticipated books list that actually like fully lived up to my expectations. I have no notes for this book. No notes. It was so good. The banter was great. The chemistry was great. The humor was great. And then we also get hit with this big emotional Abby Jimenez is one of those authors that will make you cry on one page and then make you laugh on the next. And for that, I just think she's just amazing. I also love that her books, and particularly this one, had very, very little smut. I think there was like no actual detailed smut in this book, which I love. When authors can build that physical tension between characters without specifically stating body parts, I feel like that is skill. That is where the skill is, and I love that. This plot, it was just so creative right off the bat. The entire concept concept of the story, of the Reddit romance, of the way the fake dating was set up. It was just so smart. Just perfect execution where we get this amazing swoon-worthy romance, but also we get this deeper level story about family, about mental health, about how you deal with that. And I just think that Abby Jimenez keeps getting better and better. Like every single new release, her writing gets better, and I'm so excited for what is coming next. Her 2025 release is actually on my 2025 anticipated books list. It's called Say You'll Remember Me, and I'm just really excited. I think she's shooting up to the stars. All right, back to the pile. We have The Reappearance of Rachel Price by Holly Jackson. Now this one I put on my anticipated reads list with a bit of a caveat that I have not fully loved a Holly Jackson book. I feel like she sets up these thriller mysteries very well, but I find her endings to be very chaotic. I find her twists to be very nonsensical and just like too wild, too out there that I can't believe them. But this one had such a good concept that I got really excited about. And you know what? I feel like that's a pattern of Holly Jackson books for me, is that her concepts always sound so good, and that's why I get so excited to read her books, but then the execution fails a little bit for me. So when I was reading this book, I honestly felt a little bored. Our main character, I think her name was Belle Price. I just found her mind to be very YA, and I know she writes YA thrillers, so that's probably on purpose, right? She's making her characters feel very YA because she's writing YA books, but for me, when I'm reading them, I feel like her characters seem younger than YA. Belle in particular was just jumping to all these conclusions where she was like, oh yeah, A plus B for sure equals C. And me reading it, I was like, girl, like, critical thinking. A plus B does not equal C. Like, why are you jumping to these conclusions? It doesn't make sense. And so me reading this book, just being so frustrated with Belle the entire time, made for a very not pleasant experience. This concept, this story could have been really good, but I just couldn't get past her brain, her mind. And I also feel like the character in this book was really trying hard to be not like the other girls. And you know, that's fine. If you don't want to be like the other girls, that's okay. But in some books, I feel like that's just the entire personality of a character. And it feels very 2D. It feels not well-rounded. It's not complex. It's just like that is their entire personality, is to be not like the other girls. And it just annoys me. So overall, I just couldn't get into it. And then I think on a similar note, the ending was just just a little too wild. That was The Reappearance of Rachel Price. Oh, and then we have The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. I love Leigh Bardugo. I think her books are great. Unfortunately, this one, it didn't fully live up. I still enjoyed it. I still thought it was a good book and I enjoyed my experience reading it, but there were certain points of the plot that I don't know, maybe it just wasn't what I was expecting going into a book like this. First of all, just want to give some more love to Leigh Bardugo. I feel like she is a chameleon of a writer. Every single world, every single series that she's written that I've read so far, I think I've read most of her books. They feel so different. Six of Crows even feels different than Shadow and Bone, even though they're set in the same universe. We go from high fantasy to crime gang fantasy to dark academia fantasy, and here we have historical fantasy, and they all feel like such different moods. They honestly feel like they were written by a different author, like every single one of her books. I don't know, I feel like it's a talent. I see the same thing in R.F. Kuang, where all of her different books, I'm like, how did this all come from the same author's head? Like, the writing styles are even different in each world. This book, The Familiar, is for the vibes reader. That is what I've concluded. If you like to read books just purely for vibes, this is the book for you, because the vibe is so good. The scene was set so well. We're in 1400s, 1500s in Spain. We're set in that period of the witch trials, witch hunts. We follow a scullery maid who happens to have some witchy powers that she's trying to hide. The setup was so good, but I feel like where this book failed for me was literally where the plot went. This turned into a very typical 3-trial fantasy. And from the setup of this book, that's just not where I thought this was going to go. I thought it was going to be more sneaky, behind the scenes, like witchy thing. And then yeah, just turned into a 3-trial blueprint fantasy romantasy, and I kind of wish it didn't. I feel like the ending of this book also concluded so quickly. I remember at the end just feeling like things were explained away or not explained at all. We would jump from, you know, the climax of the story where we're like, oh my god, how are our characters gonna get out of this? And then we just jump jump to, oh yeah, and then this happened and then they were free and then it's fine. And then they lived happily ever after. Like that's literally what the end of this book felt like. And I was like, but wait, how did they get out? How did they solve this? How did they live happily ever after? It was just very abrupt, very sudden. And I remember like reading the last page and I was like, wait, that's it? Like I'm just spit out of this book now. Which is honestly very surprising because Leigh Bardugo, I feel like, is really good at wrapping up her stories. I've read Six of Crows, I've read that duology, and the way in that duology you see all of these different POVs and timelines and little pieces come together at the end and fit into this like beautiful, well-crafted resolution and puzzle, like all of the puzzle pieces come together. I know Leigh Bardugo can make a very satisfying ending, but this wasn't it. Also, there is a romance in here. This could just be a me thing, but for some reason, my impression of the male lead, of the love interest in this book, when we first met him, I pictured him as like an old shriveled up crone of a man. Like I did not think he was, you know, he had an appeal, especially because our main character was like 16, 17, 18, like young. And this male to me seemed very old and aged and wrinkly, like appearing like an old man. And then all of a sudden they were doing things together and I was like, oh, what? Like, how did we get here? So I couldn't get into the romance because of that. But that's The Familiar. I know I just ripped it apart a little bit, but again, that's just my extra critical eye for Leigh Bardugo because I just expect like 150% from every single one of her books, and this one gave a 78. You know, a B+. I thought this was okay. Funny story, our M. Hen release of the year. I loved this, okay? Similar to Just for the Summer, I have no notes. This was so funny. This was so cute. I found myself literally laughing out loud reading this book, and that is something I don't do. I don't read a book and like chuckle or giggle or laugh out loud. Like maybe in my head I will, but this book made me actually physically laugh out loud. It gave what it needed to give. It had the perfect balance of humor and romance, because sometimes I find when romances are too funny, it's a little bit hard to take the romance seriously because it's like, well, this is just a comedy now. But this was balanced so perfectly on that fine line. And you know what? It's funny. Prior to this year, I always thought I was not a fake dating girly. I was like, I don't like that trope. Every other fake dating book I've read, I have not enjoyed. But after Just for the Summer and Funny Story, and even Happy Place, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I have been converted to a fake dating trope girly because I've realized it's not the trope that it is like, it's the fake dating books that I read previously that I didn't enjoy, but when they're done well and when they're done with good reason, then I like it. And I feel like this was done very, very well. So thank you, Emily Henry, and thank you, Abby Jimenez, for teaching me about the fake dating trope. Okay, I read the next book on my Kindle as well. It was This Summer Will Be Different by Carley Fortune. Oh, I'm so sad. I'm so sad that this one did not live up to my expectations. I love Carley Fortune books for their summer vibes, for the Canadian summer vibes specifically, because hello, Canadian girly over here. And I love reading her books and being able to envision the places that her characters are in because I have literally been there, and I love that. And I don't get that from many other books because there aren't too many books set like in Toronto. And I have enjoyed her romances in the past. I think Carley is really, really good. Carley, like we're best friends, I think is really, really good at developing that tension between characters, and I feel like she did that really well in this book as well. But where the tension and the yearning and the summer vibes were really good in this book, the plot was just not there. It was just not there. When I think back on this book, I always just wonder, like, what actually happened in this book? Like, if you were to go through it and try and list out the plot points, I feel like there would be very few. A lot of it was just little encounters. I wanted more plot. I also remember being so annoyed at the third act conflict in this book because it was just one of those made up third act conflicts that didn't have to be there. It just happened because we needed a third act conflict in a romance book, and it could have been fully avoided. It was very miscommunication. It was very just no reason. There was no reason for it. So my overall experience of reading this book, I felt bored, which sucks. I did not want to feel bored reading this book. It makes me so sad because I love Carley Fortune so much, and I will be picking up her next book that will come out next year. Another Kindle read, I read When Among Crows by, I just forgot her name, Veronica Roth, the author of Divergent, because when I saw the author of Divergent, I was like, I need to read that book because I have literally not read a single book from this author since the Divergent series. And it did not live up. It did not live up. But I will 100% admit that I maybe did not give this book the fair chance that it deserved, because I read this book near the end of a 24-hour readathon and my mind was mush. My brain was mush. I was not taking information in at that point, and I just really wanted to read a novella thinking that it would give my brain a little bit of a break. And spoiler alert, it didn't. So with that disclaimer, I just could not get into it. From my impression, this book had no world building, and it needed world building. It desperately needed world building. But because this book was a novella, because it was like 100 pages long, I actually don't remember the exact length, but it was short. I feel like we just dove right into the story, right into the plot. We had no character introduction, we had no world introduction, and I was just like, oh, whoa. Like, we were quite literally just thrown into a fighting ring at the beginning of the book and just plowed through from there. And right off the bat, I just couldn't get into it because number one, my brain was mush at that point, and then number two, because I desperately needed someone to explain to me the world, who we were following, and what was going on, and we never got that. So I think that this book could have been turned into a novel. Add 100 pages to it, make it a little longer. And so that was my overall impression of this one. Oh my gosh, the next book on my list was also a Kindle read for me. I read Tangled Up in You by Christina Lauren. I love this tag team duo of authors. I tend to enjoy most of their books, but this one fell short for me. Oh my gosh, so many disappointing reads in a row. I think my expectations of this book were just different. This book just wasn't what I expected, and that could have been my fault because what this book delivered was pretty much what the description of this book was. But here are my thoughts. I wanted a true modern day retelling of Rapunzel in this book. I wanted it to be subtle. I wanted it to be nuanced. I wanted to read about what Rapunzel would be like in the modern day world. What we got here, I feel like, was more like Enchanted, that 2000s movie Enchanted, where Disney fairy tale princesses literally just get dropped into the real world, and they're very like princessy, they're very naive, they're very like they don't know what's going on, almost like a parody of themselves. I feel like that's what we got from this book. The characters were all just so exaggerated. The FMC was very annoying to me. Just to put it very clearly, she was very enchanted, and that's not what I wanted. I also do feel like not much happened in this book. Again, if we were to break this book into its specific plot points, I feel like not much happened. 90% of the plot happened in the last like 100 pages of this book, which is fine, but by that point, I was just so not into it, and the end of the book did redeem it a little bit for me. But I feel like, I don't know, maybe this was just a case of me going into the book at the wrong time, expecting the wrong thing. I wanted a more nuanced, subtle version, a retelling of the story. Ooh, I actually have physical of this next book. So I read Reckless, and I've talked a lot about this series on my channel, so I don't think I have to elaborate too much, but I think Powerless was a very obvious ripoff of The Red Queen in The Hunger Games, but it gave me enough to be curious about the second book, and I thought that, you know, she would spin the second book, give it a little bit more uniqueness, and turn it into its own thing. And so I had high hopes, I did. But after reading this, I don't know, I think I have to drop this series. I don't think I can read on. I think if you really loved Powerless and you really loved the main character, you would like this book because a lot of it was just basically them trying to figure out their relationship. Most of this book was them bickering and then just randomly making out 2 seconds later. And it didn't do it for me because, again, I don't know. I felt the first book was very tropey. It was very doing tropes just to do tropes. So I wasn't fully convinced of this main romance, of this main couple yet, and I needed this second book to be really good in plot for me to be convinced about this series, and this was the opposite of that. We didn't get plot, we just kind of got relationship building, and so it wasn't what I wanted. I've also seen lovers of this series, fans of this series, admit that this felt very second book syndrome. I just wish we had more plot, to be honest. I wish we had more uniqueness. I wish we had more plot and less bickering and making out 2 seconds later, which it didn't make sense to me. personally. So yeah, that was reckless. I really wanted to get into this series because I love being part of fandoms. I love being excited about things with a lot of other people where you can talk to other people about it and bond over your love for characters and stuff, but I just couldn't do it with this series, unfortunately. And then our last book on that list was Spectacular by Stephanie Garber. This, I don't know if I'm gonna have much to say about this one because this is just the holiday novella for the Caraval series. It's just cute. The whole point of this book is to spend some extra cozy time with the characters that we grew to love from the Caraval trilogy. There isn't much of a plot. This does not contribute to like the overarching plot of, I don't know, Caraval. It's complete, but I feel like there's no important information in here that you would need to continue on in the Stephanie Garber universe. It's just for fun. It's just cute. It's just cozy. It's a good one to read around the holidays. The main highlight of this book for me, I think, were the illustrations that just make it really fun to look through and read. I'll show you one of them. I just flipped to a random page and got this, but like, you see, like, it's just cute. It's for Christmas. And so the experience was great. It was good. But yeah, you know, it's nothing that blew my mind or changed my soul, but it was cute. This one was just for fun. Absolutely for fun. But that brings me to the end of this list. Those were all of my anticipated reads of 2024. I can't believe I did read them all. I thought by the end of the year there would be a few that I still needed to read and that I would maybe make a little bit of a reading vlog out of them, but I managed to read all of the books I was excited about this year, which is great. That being said, I'm gonna leave you guys here for now. I hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, please leave me a like and a comment. If you don't know what to comment down below, let me know what your most anticipated book of the year was and how you ended up liking it, if it lived up to your expectations. If you like me, subscribe, do that bell thing, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!